Welcome to the sixth episode of Hey We Need to Talk. Over the last few days, we have seen hundreds of thousands of farmers from mostly Punjab, but also other states of North India, descend upon the national capital in New Delhi to protest against a set of agrarian laws that they believe would change their lives forever. We have seen how the farmers met with fierce resistance, almost warlike resistance, from the Manohar Lal Khattar government in Haryana, which deployed all means at their disposal to stop the marching contingent in its tracks, from spraying cold water using water cannons to shooting tear gas, and even digging up trenches with bulldozers on the highways to stop the farmers. The government literally went all out to make sure that the farmers don't reach New Delhi. But in a dramatic 3-day showdown, we saw how the farmers literally breached everything on the way, from metal barricades, barbed wires, to concrete barricades, and even freight containers, to ultimately reach New Delhi, purely on the basis of the steely resolve, right, despite the biting cold. Now, if you want to know more about what these agrarian laws are and why the farmers are protesting against them, you may visit our website www.11thcolumn.com and tune into the fourth episode of this podcast series with Devinder Singh Sekhon, who is a Punjab-based farmer and protest mobilizer. But today I have with me Amandeep Sandhu, who is a Punjabi writer and freelance journalist. Amandeep has previously written 2 novels called Sepia Leaves and Roll of Honor, but his last book is a non-fiction called Punjab, Journeys Through Fault Lines, which is based on his extensive travels through the state. I have Amandeep with me today to help us make sense of what the protests mean in a broader socio-political and economic sense, and how also the broader public, including the urban middle class, has been looking at the farmer protest or reacting to the farmer protest. Welcome to the show, Amandeep.
Thank you so much, Anshuman. I'm very happy to speak to your audience.
Amandeep, I just want to begin with a sort of broad question. You have traveled extensively through Punjab in recent years. What I want to understand from you is how do you see these farmer protests in a more broad socio-political sense from Punjab's point of view? Do you think this is somewhat of a tipping point? Do they reflect a sort of crossover point where decades of grievances are finally coming out in a certain way through a particular agenda, which this time are a set of agrarian laws? Do you think there's something bigger in these protests?
Thank you. It's a very interesting question. If I can add a little comment to how you introduced our talk. Yes, farmers breached all the barricades with great ingenuity and courage, but they also did something very gentle alongside. They served langar to the policemen they were fighting. Repeatedly, barricade after barricade fell, and barricade after barricade, the farmers opened langar, which is communal food for anybody who wants to partake in that, and they fed the policemen along the way they were coming. That, I think, was a very, very important part of this marching towards Delhi. What you ask is very interesting, because in some ways, the Green Revolution model of agriculture, which we needed to start with in India in the 1960s, at that time, the larger Punjab, Haryana was part of the same Punjab. They were a total of about 3% of the nation's land, but for the last 6 decades, they have been contributing up to 50 to 60% of the central pool of grains for the country. You must remember that in the 1960s, we were faced with a severe food shortage. We had a sense that it might become again another great Bengal famine of the 1943, in which 4.3 million people had died. The governments were very keen that we become food sufficient, and within a decade of the Green Revolution, India indeed became food sufficient. And it's a different matter that this year in the hunger index, we are back to 94 out of 107 countries. And we need to understand, how did this also happen? How did we become from completely food sufficient to so hungry once again? And that is where, in a reflection, you can see all that has gone wrong with the Green Revolution model as well. You said, is it a tipping point? I have a slightly different take on it because, you know, the farmers of Punjab, Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh, North Madhya Pradesh, Eastern Rajasthan, and the farmers who have, since the Green Revolution, done very, very well for themselves. Farmers for Bihar, farmers from Bengal, farmers from Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, all these states, Kerala, Madhya Pradesh, which is a huge cotton belt and a sugar belt. All of them have been trying their best to continue functioning within the system of agriculture that was available to them. But in the last 2 decades, you have seen about 3 lakh farmer suicides as well. So one is India tipping down to 94 on hunger index. Another is another 3 lakh suicides in the last 20 years. Something is severely wrong with what is going on in agriculture. The farmers of the country, actually, and especially from Punjab, they have been protesting this downfall and have been suggesting measures to the governments, both state and center, which nobody has really listened to in all these years. And now, with the new regime which the Modi government has introduced, these 3 farm bills, plus the electricity bill, we are basically throwing the baby with the bathwater. We are actually throwing out the entire system that we had built, which had problems, definitely problems, which we spoke about just now. But we are giving up the whole thing to corporates, to private players. This has not only angered the farmers, it has also caused a sense that their very survival, their very livelihood, their system of life, everything is going to collapse under a private corporate regime. And they see it as a second colonization of the agrarian sector by the private crony capitalists. So that is where the anger comes from. That definitely the system had issues, but you can't demolish the complete system and try to replace it with private ownership. Not ownership, I mean, the entire agrarian system is largely private. And it's actually the biggest private sector in the country, though it is held in very, very small parts by millions of farmers, but by crony capitalists. I mean, you can't give it to them like this. And that is what has brought about this surge, I think. And I don't think it is hundreds and thousands. Per my understanding, at present, there are about 3.5 to 4 lakh farmers who have Gheraud Delhi and who are pushing for nothing less than the government taking back its 3 laws plus the agricultural law, the electricity law.
Right. Firstly, thank you for reminding us that there was a sense of tenderness or an element of tenderness amidst all the steely resolve or the fierceness. The fact that langars became a prominent feature of the agitation or the marching contingent itself shows that. So I'm grateful to you for reminding us of that. Secondly, thanks for giving us a broader historical context and drawing attention to the broader structures that are driving these protests, or the structural grievances that are driving these protests. Every movement, has a certain build-up. Never appears out of the blue. At least a movement of this scale. So thank you for telling us what it actually means in a temporal or historical sense, right? But what I want to understand from you is this almost automatic conflation of the protests. But what I want to understand from you is that a lot of the protesters happen to be from Punjab, and many of them happen to be Sikh. So there's this almost certain, spontaneous conflation of the protests with the Sikh identity, and then attached to that, this malicious or systematic attempt by the media and the larger public discourse to conflate the protesters with the Khalistani movement, with a clear attempt to discredit the entire agitation, right? So what do you think about this?
The state narrative is that the farmers don't understand the bills,
Mm.
you know. And then there is, of course, the media. You can even now notice that hardly any television media is covering the protests. I have been very deeply involved with it, and I noticed that between Saturday evening and Monday morning, even print media stopped talking about the protest. Before that, there were news updates every half an hour, 1 hour, but now they started becoming 20 hours, 22 hours. Suddenly, after Tuesday, again, print media is covering. This is an evolving thing going on right now in front of us. So we have to be very, very cautious of how it is really being projected. So that is, it's still not the larger public. It is the media, it's the government. Larger public, I think urban India, which is what we are really talking about here, we are speaking in English, which is the language of urban India. We are all actually one or two or three generations out of the villages, you know. And I don't get it that why don't have we really forgotten the reasons we left the village in the first place? And have we really forgotten that there are people still in the villages who are suffering? We are suffering in urban situations as well, no doubt about it. But there is an agrarian India, which is easily about 53% of India. And this India has been suffering and has not been looked at by even the neoliberal policies that came in 1991. The whole thrust of the neoliberal policies was towards uh, urban growth and industry. They neglected the agrarian sector. What? And the second thing that you added is, which is genuine. I mean, it's happening. There is a element of Sikh dominating the protests. It's not really like that, in the sense that the numbers of people who have come from all over the country, North India at least, even Gujarat and Maharashtra now, they perhaps the Sikhs would not be in as great numbers as the rest of India. Yet there is something about Punjab and Punjab's leadership of sorts of this protest, and that is because Sikhs are noticed quite easily by the world. And when they start adding this Khalistan narrative, it just shows me that the rest of India, especially the liberal class, which sort of makes up the mind of India, which writes in media, which is the one which assumes that it knows India and can talk about India, has no idea of what the Khalistan movement was or what has changed in the Khalistan, in the word Khalistan over the decades, and where we are now compared to where we were in the 1980s and where we were in the 1980s compared to where we were in the 1920s. This idea of statehood or of a Sikh state is basically an idea of where can we be secure. It's an idea every human being asks. Every animal asks this question, every bird asks this question: where am I safe? And so, right from the 1927, when Motilal Nehru presented a draft of the Purna Swaraj, Jinnah, Ambedkar, and Master Tara Singh opposed it. The Jinnah trajectory led to, sadly, the creation of Pakistan, which I completely feel sad about, because why should we break down like that? Um, Ambedkar's trajectory has led to the rise of Bahujan politics in which we now live. And it is very important that we acknowledge that politics. But the Sikh question at that time just didn't go anywhere. And by the 80s, it became a militancy issue. It became an armed struggle against the state. You are from Assam, you know what happened in Assam as well. We can't neglect all these issues and bundle them away and throw them away as if we don't want to touch them. There are genuine issues here of people, and we must ask them. Of course, Punjab played with blood, like Assam played with blood. We lost about 50,000 people at that time. There have been 25,000 disappearances, illegal killings, and extrajudicial killings. So the current idea of Khalistan is really a human rights question. That are we never going to give justice to the families who lost their people, the communities who lost their people? And there are, of course, a few state agents who continue making the Khalistan into a separatist movement. That is not really what it is. So I think this is a farmers' movement. We must remain focused on food sufficiency for India. We must remain focused on whether the farmers are genuinely going to benefit from the new system or not. They were already not benefiting from the previous system. And what they are now saying is take back these laws, which basically means that bring back status quo. Actually, they are not asking for status quo as well. They are saying that take back the laws and then let's talk about the real issues which we are facing on the ground. Right. See, to understand it even more easily, think about what has happened to health in the country since neoliberalism. Basically, we had a fairly well functioning health system in the country. I was born in a government hospital. My father was born in a government hospital, you know, and but by the 90s, when we decided, okay, we want private players to come in, government does not have funds to run all the hospitals in the country, and let private players come there and they start taking over and providing people whatever they need. We realize now, 20 years later, that that did not work out. We basically abandoned the government hospital. Similarly, look at education. What did the government do? It started bringing in private players into education. And what happened? The government schools failed. I studied in government schools, I studied in government colleges, I studied in government universities. Where is that government sponsored education and health system in India now? And then why are we doing that with the APMC mandis, which are actually the equivalent of schools and hospitals? We should not be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as I earlier said to you. There are definite issues with how the agrarian system is set up that needs corrections, but these laws are not going to do that. In fact, these laws are taking us exactly where we went with education and health.
Right. Actually, yes, that comparison you made with health and education actually makes it more illustrative and clearer what this issue is really about. Is it just about three specific agrarian bills or agrarian laws, or is it a larger structural socio-economic issue, or also a very deeply political issue? And also, yeah, how you spoke about how this entire narrative of self-determination or a particular peripheral minority being heavily securitized, and you said I come from Assam. Yeah, I do understand the somewhat common history that my state shares with yours. In fact, we even had the same police chief once upon a time during a very dark, particularly dark phase of in the modern history of both states, Mr. KPS Gill, right? So yeah, I do understand what you're talking about there, and very rightly so. Um, but Amandeep, what I want to understand now is you have traveled extensively through Punjab, particularly its countrysides, and you have been closely involved in the ongoing agitation. You've spoken to many people there. What really is the cross section of people, particularly within the Punjabi context, who are participating in the current protests? Because in the last 50, 60 days of agitation that was ongoing in Punjab, for instance, the Shambhu Morcha protest, we have seen, a wide range of people like artists, singers, actors, and many other non-farming allies also participate in the protest very actively, right? So are we seeing some kind of unprecedented across the board participation this time?
Absolutely, and that I think is to the great credit of this movement that is going on. And I will come to Punjab, but let me add something in really big words here. Is we are loving it that Haryana is with us.
Right.
You know, if you look at the history of the last 50 years of Punjab, most of the issues came because of the division when Haryana was carved out of Punjab, and we could not agree on river waters, we could not agree on various other things. This time, the spirit Haryana has showed to Punjab is, to my mind, actually, we are gone back to East Punjab, which after partition we were left with when two-thirds of Punjab went off to Pakistan. So it is a great surge of that kind, which is incredible, actually. At the another level where it is incredible is that uh, most of the Punjab protests, can you hear me?
Uh, yes, I can.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, most of the Punjab protests over the last 100 years have been about one community or the other, mostly about Sikhs, whether it's a Gurdwara movement or whether it was the Punjabi Suba movement, Gurdwara movement in the 1920s, the Muzara movement, which was land to tiller movement in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, the Punjabi Suba movement, which was basically an Akali movement. Um, most of these movements have been about one community. But what we need to notice is that Punjab is largely an agrarian state, uh, and this is structural. The government has chosen to keep it as the food basket, what they call, of India, and that's why there's not much industry in Punjab. Uh, and because it is agrarian, there is, of course, the farmer, and 65% of the 18 lakh or so farmers in Punjab are basically small and marginal. Then there are another 5 to 7 lakh workers, laborers in Punjab who are mostly Dalits, and then there is the Bania, and these farmers are mostly Sikh. Then there are the Hindu Baniyas who are the Artiyas and who are the shopkeepers, and they are a big part. There are about 30,000 Artiyas in Punjab. Uh, their whole future is at stake because most of their money has been invested in these farmers. And if this changes, they are not going to recover their money at all. The small shopkeepers, the agricultural instrument makers, the truck drivers, all of this. So it is a huge part of Punjab across religion, across caste, which is going to suffer from these laws. And that is why Punjab has beautifully come together along with Haryana, and Punjab and Haryana have both come together. As far as singers go, yes, there is also an interest from the singers. Some of them have uh, given beautiful songs. We must recognize this idea of singers in Punjab because they are sort of folk heroes, and they were folk heroes until now because, at least in the last 2, 3 decades, they have been singing of guns and misogynistic songs, about Jat pride and stuff like that. But with this movement starting, many of them started producing songs about the real issues of Punjab and the agrarian distress of Punjab, and they have come with us. Um, Middle class is still not as active, and I really want not only middle class of India, but actually the whole nation's middle class to start taking interest in this protest because you know what? The first to suffer, from this is going to be the middle class.
Right.
And I'll tell you why. With ESMA removed and stockpiling of farm produce made unlimited, private players are going to jump into the market, pick up all the produce, stock them in their godowns, and then play with market rates and keep a high level of inflation going so that most of the food items are going to be highly priced. And who pays for this? You remember this, that the farmer produces food. He will still eat from his field. It is the urban middle class who has no connection with land, who can only buy things from the big bazaars and the Reliance stores and go shopping. These are the guys. We are the guys who are going to first face the problem. Just notice a few days back, onions went up to 100 rupees a kg. And why? There was enough supply in Maharashtra, but the traders were playing their games. And these are the games that we are going to enter into if we do not oppose these laws right now. And we can't really let crony capitalists rule us, right?
Right. So yes, it mostly it seems like from all the discussions that, well, this is, this is a farmers issue. Why should the urban elite bother so much? But yes, it's fascinating how you drew that link. Except, the fear is that the urban middle class that we have is perhaps one of the most depoliticized middle classes in the world today, I would say. Amandeep, something that I want to understand from you and something that I've been thinking about myself regarding the protests and how outsiders, quote unquote, outsiders see the protests, particularly the urban liberal middle class or just the urban middle class. In this regard, I personally have come across many visuals on social media. For instance, this single protester taking the full force of the water cannon, right? Uh, and then, for instance, there's a picture of one farmer eating a single roti, right? And then the caption says something like, "This is the frugality of the farmer. This is the resolve of the farmer." Uh, you know, so by doing so, I think there is a great risk of over romanticization of the deplorable conditions of a set of people who actually deserve to live a comfortable and dignified life, right? So by romanticizing the frugality or the poverty of these farmers, we limit the discussion, right? We're not able to move forward. There is also the thing about the coronavirus, right? A lot of people observing the protests, particularly the urban crowd again, tend to believe that no, the farmers are absolutely not concerned about COVID-19, right? But the fact is that even they are human beings and they have families who worry about their elderly members going into the protests, right? So they might have some genuine concerns about the virus spreading because of the agitation, right? But then again, it comes down to a compromise that they have to make, right? I remember seeing this one farmer speaking to a police in a TV channel report, in which the farmer told the police कि हमें भी तो कोरोना का डर है, लेकिन गले में तो फांसी का फंदा लगा हुआ है, right? So it's a compromise, it's a constant compromise for them to see what matters at this point, right? So in that regard, do you genuinely believe that there is a tendency, that there is a phenomenon where the urban liberal middle class often, perhaps with genuine intentions, but often ends up over glorifying something that should not be glorified?
Of course, there is an element of that. And the issue really is the urban liberal middle class lives somewhere in stratosphere. They don't live on planet Earth.
Right.
They are just happy gazing at everything. They are the spectator class of this country. More or less their lives are set. They have jobs, they're getting salaries, they go to the market, they pick up what they need. They go to fancy holidays. They most of them are double income families. Their kids go to fancy schools, so they don't really know what is going on the ground. They have, through their education and through their caste as well, inured themselves of the larger issues of this nation. So when they look at something like this, I mean, of course, their hearts beat. They are also sensitive to some extent, but they're not informed well enough. I've been saying this for the last few days is, all of us in this country, especially urban folks, we should all go and do a 1-year immersive experience in villages. Right. Look at what 2 cycles of crops do to people. One Rabi and one Kharif crop. We call it Hadi and Soni, in Punjab. But that's what you should do. You should understand what is going on the ground. This picture of a single roti or this picture of standing in front of the water cannon, this is aesthetics. Absolutely. But I am of the opinion, as a writer, I'm of the opinion that aesthetics for aesthetics' sake is not really the kind of work I want to do. My aesthetic has to be grounded, it has to be rooted, and it has to come from what is going on in reality, in the people. As far as COVID is concerned, look at this again very carefully. In COVID, when COVID happened, we moved on a certain emotional graph as a society. We started with bravado, with all those balcony gatherings and thali pitoing and all that kind of stuff. And then we suddenly became very scared because the cases started going up. And then we got so tired of being scared that we abandoned all caution to the wind. What has been going on now COVID came in we became serious about it about 7 months back. Initially we denied it. Then we did this lockdown, and then we suddenly started focusing on opening the economy. We even conducted a state elections in this period. We even allowed all sorts of religious functions to happen. You know, this is not how any country of the size of India should handle a pandemic. I think it's an utter failure of the government in how they manage the whole pandemic. And people see that, right? People on the ground, people in the villages. Also, remember, COVID is largely an urban phenomenon. And that's for a very simple reason that the virus stays in the air for a while before it falls on the ground. And when air is not moving, when you have closed rooms and ACs working, there are greater chances of infection than where farmers actually live in the villages, which are open air and the winds are blowing all the time, right? So when they know that the government anyway doesn't care for us, and this is the sense they have on the ground, that this is a mess. They know it is a mess. And that's very sad of a government to allow the citizens to feel that it has really become a mess. Now there is this challenge, and the government had to use the pandemic exactly to bring out these ordinances and then bulldoze them through the parliament, really bulldoze them without quorum of the Rajya Sabha present and make these laws. A farmer has, if he has anything, he has a great instinct. They live amidst nature. However technological we have made that nature now, because of green revolution, we fill it with hybrid seeds, we put pesticides, fertilizers, we use tractors and combine harvesters. It's become very technocratic, but they still look at the sky to know whether it will rain or not.
Right.
They have this very deep instinct, and their instinct tells them that the government has played a game, that under the cover of pandemic, they brought out this large um, laws, large in the sense of the impact of the laws, and they are going to take these farmers for a ride. Now, a farmer will not allow the government to do that. I just hope that the pandemic doesn't spread more there. I mean, we don't have uh, cases shooting up. But very frankly, I have been every single day of the pandemic, I have been looking at various websites to understand the numbers. And I feel that there's a big lie going on even in how the numbers are projected. There is, of course, a big lie going on in between the two tests, the RT-PCR test and the antigen tests. We should be doing RT-PCR, but we are doing antigen, and we are calling them tests. So there is something very wrong going on in the management of the pandemic in the country, and the farmers are not going to be sitting back with the fear that, oh God, I'll get COVID. The single shiniest light in this whole pandemic is also that the fatality rate is not as high as was initially estimated. It was a new disease. We didn't know what will happen. The fatality rate has remained low, roughly about 1%. And it's a razor's edge that the farmer walks to do this protest.
Right. Amandeep, I have one last question. You have already written a few days back in a piece that the Dilli Chalo protests have sort of shattered the miasma of Hindutva arrogance. Um, do you really see this as a formidable or as a unprecedented moment of collective resistance in the context of the last 6 years since this government came to power? We have had the Shaheen Bagh sit-in last year, which attracted a lot of attention. It went on for a long time, and then COVID shattered it. But do you see these protests as something that might irreversibly discredit the Hindutva regime?
Do you see it as that?
I would say I am apprehensive on that front because perhaps the last few elections have sort of made me apprehensive of how protests actually translate into votes or no votes.
I agree with that. In fact, I was doing that piece for Amazon on the effects of the lockdown, and I was talking to a lot of migrant labor who was
Right.
walking back home. I think it was our utter tragedy that happened.
Right.
That a train runs over people who are sleeping on the tracks. They sleep on the tracks because the tracks have less mosquitoes on them. It's like a very simple reason for them to sleep on tracks. They can't sleep on roadsides because they're never sure of vehicles. They can't sleep in shrubs because they're full of insects and mosquitoes. So tracks are clearer places in that sense. But anyway, I was asking a lot of migrant workers, who do they blame for their tragedy? And I think every single respondent said God. India is a largely fatalistic country. The 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 cloud of power that is laid upon the poor and the marginal of the country is so dense that they can't see whether their oppression is coming from God or from a political elite of the country. They are unable to distinguish, and that has shown up in the Bihar results as well. On elections, I know this is freewheeling, so I'm mentioning this as a freewheeling conversation. You must notice that since Gujarat 2017 elections, every single counting day of the ballot, results freeze at 5 p.m., numbers get stuck on your television screen, and they start moving only by 11 p.m., 12 p.m., 1 p.m., to 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Something happens. I don't know what happens, but I've been seeing this as a pattern. There has been discussion, of course, of the EVM being tampered, but I see this as a very direct pattern. Basically, what happens is that when a candidate wins, the message has to go to Delhi, and it has to be signed. The certificate has to be signed by Delhi and given to the candidate, and that process is in the evening, and manipulation happens at that point. Um, what was your second part of your question?
That do you think? I think perhaps you have already answered it by saying
yeah. Challenge to
Yeah.
Hindutva.
Yes,
Challenge
yes,
to Hindutva.
yes, yeah.
Yes, I have been a big cynic myself. I'm very disappointed by how the country has gone in the last few years, and I have been feeling that it's the tunnel is getting darker. Uh, we will have Hindutva winning for the next 20-25 years. It worries me a lot. But you know what? In this protest, I started by saying that nothing will happen. And then I started talking again to people a lot, and everybody tells me one single thing. And they say, look at the eyes of the protesters, look at their resolve. And the protesters are, this is a do or die situation for us. They have said that we are going to force the government to take back the laws, and they are steadfast on that goal. The BJP government, especially Narendra Modi, has never taken back any law or even an ordinance. So it is that, but I really see this, what is going on, only because Punjab is sort of leading the protests. All farmers, everybody who is a part of this, are equally part of the protest. There is no discrimination between them. But the nature it has taken is of basically 7 years of Hindutva and whatever the Hindutva government has spread a sense of a miasma of fear in the society, is pitted against 700 years of Punjab's valorous history, in which Punjab has taken on Delhi repeatedly, whether it was the Mughal Empire or the British Empire or whoever came to Delhi. Punjab stood up to it. It is 7 years of Hindutva pitted against 700 years of Punjab. And let us see who wins.
Right. Well, it's being a cynic myself, it's always good to talk to a fellow cynic, I think. But yes, we can only hope that this moment, translates or transforms into something bigger than itself. But I agree with you that seeing the last 4 or 5 years and the electoral gains that the Hindutva regime, the Hindutva political project has made, it becomes very difficult to hope for something. But I'm sure you would agree, even us cynics are often humbled by certain things, by moments like these. For instance, you said the look on the eyes, in the eyes of the farmer. So I think there is still some hope that this will lead to something constructive, something bigger. I would say in terms of holding meaning, I think the farmers have already achieved remarkably, and they have already etched a certain moment in our times that will be remembered for a long time to come. But thank you so much, Amandeep, for so patiently explaining and making sense of this entire protest in a much broader sense. I don't think I have come across what you said, your points of view, the perspectives that you presented anywhere so far. And I must confess, I haven't read your books, which certainly I will now. And I also hope to have you join me in this show sometime in the future, and have a conversation, perhaps on this topic or something else. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I think this whole short bite media culture that has spread right now is a little problematic because people don't get to the depths of things. And I think we had a very good conversation.